Hello and welcome to The Truth About Storytelling. I'm Tyreen Martinson, author, poet, and podcaster with over 20 books, 100 poems, and dozens of short stories published. You can find my books online or at brick and mortar bookstores. I started this podcast to encourage writers and share what I've discovered on my writing journey, both the triumphs and the struggles. So, The Truth About Storytelling is kind of about pulling back the curtain and looking about what goes into crafting compelling stories, from general writing tips to insights into my own fantasy and sci-fi worlds, as well as my poetry. Each month, I also will be highlighting exclusive book deals and special promotions, so stay tuned for news on those in every episode. So actually, I'm going to talk about that right now. This month's book funnel is the No Spice Fantasy in February with over 40 authors participating. So there's more than 40 books in the book funnel deal. And I will put a link for that in my show notes for the audio channels that I'm on. And it will also be on my website and in my newsletter. So look forward for that. The book funnel, the No Spice for February Fantasy in February book funnel ends on Friday. So just so you know, it's kind of limited time at this point, but it has been going on for the whole month. And then next month, I'll be involved in another book funnel. So every time I will turn over a month, I'll have something new to offer readers, and I'll be involved with other writers who are offering up their books too. So it won't be just my books that I'm talking about in those book funnels. It's like a lot of writers. So if you're looking for good books, I recommend checking those out. There'll be deals or even maybe freebies, so they'll be there. All right, so in personal writing and goal news, for the Becoming a Healthy Writer goal, I am continuing on my step count goals. I got a little behind 1 week. I had 1 week, I think it was the second week of the month, I was done like 9,000 steps for average for the whole week. So I even had some like really low step count days down to like 3,000 or 4,000 steps in one day, I think. But overall, this last week I've done over 11,000 steps a day. And so I brought my whole monthly step count level average up to like 10,400 steps a day. So I'm exactly where I want to be. And I'm going to continue doing that this week. So for developing worlds and words that are entertaining and meaningful, that's my second big umbrella goal. I am deep into the Darkblade trilogy, working on book 2 and book 3 at the same time because I'm trying to make sure the pacing and the scenes line up. So I'm really excited to be working on that project again, and I'm hoping to really get it done really well over the next month and a half or 2 months. Meanwhile, I am also working on a creative visibility goal, and that's what this podcast is about. I will be putting out a new newsletter this week, and I'm taking a Kickstarter class tomorrow because I'm planning on putting out a Kickstarter project, and it might not be my fantasy, it might be my poetry, but I have yet to decide. And I'm going to that class tomorrow online, so I'm excited about that. So anyhow, those are the things I'm working on in my personal writing news and goals. So the main content of this podcast episode today is going to be about how to find and protect your best writing time. And my notes, my apologies, are below where the camera is. If you're listening to this on audio, you might realize that I am attempting one more time to do this on video. I had kind of given up video last week, and I was like, I'm just not going to even try again for like 2 or 3 months. And then today I thought, I have a new idea for how to do this. So I'm trying again, and we'll see how it goes. It may simply be audio content again that comes out this week. We'll find out. All right, so I keep working and trying new things because I feel like I need to do that to develop my skills, and because I have specific goals about where I want to go as a writer. So that's why I have been changing things up a little bit. But again, jumping into the main podcast content for the day, I want to talk about how to find and protect your best writing time. So, in the past, as I've shared before, I have had different struggles with writing consistently over time. And some of that is I just have so many ideas that I want to jump from project to project. But it's not only that. Sometimes I just struggle to write consistently and have that time to write. And sometimes it just feels like there's just a lot going on, and I could blame it on like scheduling things or appointments or family stuff. But the reality is, my best writing time is going to happen because I make it happen. And yes, life can be really busy, life can be unexpected, there can be huge roller coaster moments in our lives, whether it's, our own health or something going on with us, or it's something going on with a family member or a friend. We live lives, right? We have full and healthy lives with other people in them, and we don't always choose how each and every day goes. But even within just variable time differences and things like that, we can make a choice to carve out a little bit of writing time. So, for example, on Saturday, I don't usually write on Saturdays a lot. By the way, I have like a Monday through Friday kind of work at my writing vibe. And then on Saturdays, it's Saturdays and Sundays are kind of like I try to get a little bit of writing in, but I don't expect myself to do as much. And it kind of depends on the weekend and what's going to go on it. So on this Saturday, I had a really great day with my husband. We had spent a lot of time away from our house. We did some fun things with our daughters in the morning and our son-in-law, and then we went for a walk in the afternoon, and we spent some time with his parents in the evening. So that's the kind of day where I'm not going to have a lot of time to sit and write on a project. But I knew that I wanted to spend a little bit of time on it. So what I did was I spent some time in the morning before I got going for the day. I spent some time writing in the morning. And I knew I wanted to do that. So I set it up ahead of time that I was going to write for half an hour in the morning. And then I took my journal and I have a little like, I always want to call them iPads. So not iPads because it's not an Apple product. Uh, it's a little screen with a foldable keyboard that I bring along with me. I took those things and I had my phone with me, and I ran around and did things throughout the day. And when I was at my mother-in-law and father-in-law's house, I spent a little bit of time actually writing on my phone. Here I brought all this other stuff to write with, but I spent a little bit of time writing on my phone, and it was kind of nice. I was able to, even if it was only 15 minutes, I had this idea, I wrote it down, I thought through some stuff for the Darkblade trilogy that I'm going to be working on this week. And so that was kind of fun to have some idea generation that I could just do with my phone with me. So maybe that wasn't exactly super planned out, carved out writing time. Yeah, I knew I wanted to do something, and so I kind of had it in my head, and I brought the tools with me so I could do something like that. And so I recommend, if you're struggling to find writing time, if you got a really busy week, if you got just a busy schedule all the time, to look for like little windows of opportunity where you can carve out a moment for yourself, whether that's, you get up a half an hour earlier than you really like to, and you spend some time writing, or you stay up a half an hour later, or when your whole family's busy and gathering, and yeah, you want to be with them, but maybe you spend 10 minutes on the side scribbling some ideas down for a story, and it's okay to just take 10 to 15 minutes to do that, and get right back into the conversation that you were having that was fun. So there are ways to work in writing even within a really busy life. And so mainly I want to talk about that today, and really how to find that, because it's a really common struggle. We often feel like we don't have time to write. And that's just simply usually not true. We usually can find little windows of time. I think I shared in a previous podcast that I took a class when I think I was like 19. It was a community class at my community college, and it was taught by a woman who wrote Western adventures, and it's definitely like late 80s, early 90s. And she loved her writing. She had written dozens of books, and she was teaching this class, and someone in class said, "Oh, I just don't have time." And she said, "Well, I wrote my first four books in 15-minute increments." And we were like, "What? You wrote your first four books in 15-minute increments?" But she'd written her first four books when her children were young and she was working. And she managed to write novels in 15-minute increments, just, one or two 15-minute increments a day. And so she did say what she did was she would think about what she wanted to write before she sat down to write. So while she was doing something else, she was doing the dishes, or she was, changing a diaper, or, on her way to work in her car, she'd be thinking through what she wanted to write about that day. So she'd think of the setting, she'd think of the characters and the conflict that she wanted in that scene, and where she wanted to start and end. And so she kind of did a lot of pre-writing in her head, and she'd write little notes about it in a notebook, and then she would sit down, and for 15 minutes she'd just write, like just madly write that idea out. And then she'd write like a little bit of note about how far she got and if it went well, and then she'd wait until the next time she could sit down and do another 15-minute writing session. So the reality is we can carve out time even in the craziest times of our lives. So, well, I guess I should say that most of the time we could carve out writing time even in the craziest times of our lives. So some of the ways we could identify where we can find time in our schedule, or we can kind of think about how our natural rhythms are and whether we're regularly a morning person or a night person, whether we feel more energetic at certain times of the day, and whether or not we have more mental energy at certain times of the day. I know for years I really wanted to be an evening writer because I used to be kind of a night owl. Not really. I feel like I was like a late evening owl, if anything. I always like to stay up like an hour or two later than everybody else, but I didn't really want to stay up like all night. I just was more of an 11 o'clock to midnight kind of person. And now I'm not like that anymore. And I went through a phase where I was having particular health issues, and it seemed like I'd get to about dinner time and my brain would just shut off. I'd be like, it's all brain fog, can't think, could not create after dinner time. And that was very frustrating for me because I had been a night owl or an evening writer. And so I had to adjust and think about at that moment where I had the most energy. And I realized I had more energy in the morning. And so I shifted from being an evening writer to being a morning writer. And it was hard for me even to wrap my mind around that, the fact that I had changed somehow in my life to being less of an evening person and more of a morning person. And I would say to this day, I wouldn't really call myself a true morning person, because the people I know who are true morning people, they're awake at like 5 a.m. every morning, and they're just like, they jump out of bed and run around and clean their house, and, they do all their exercises, and they're, fully pumped up at 5 a.m. I'm definitely not like that. I wake up at 5 and think, really? I'm awake, but I don't really want to get up yet. And usually around 5:45, 6 o'clock that I'm actually awake. So I can't say I'm a true morning person who just, jumps out of bed, at 5 a.m. and runs around. But I usually wake up and feel energized about an hour after I've woken up. And that regardless of whether I drink caffeine. I used to think I had to drink caffeine to be awake in the morning. I realized it doesn't really matter. It takes about 45 minutes to an hour either way for me to wake up. So, again, I'm not a true morning person, but I write best in the morning or all the way to like early afternoon. And it also varies from day to day. I can't say it's the same for me every single day. So if you can identify your best writing time for during the day, where your mental energy is. But if you're like me, it might be based on just how you feel any given day. Because for me, it definitely changes each day. And I have to kind of think about it in the morning every morning. So I'll plan out how I want my writing week to look on Sunday. I'll like do a little planning session for about an hour and think about, okay, here's where my appointments are, here's where my commitments are, and here are the hours then that I could write. And I'll pick out some times, but that each day when I wake up, I look at that and I go, is that really going to work today? I might have to adjust some things and kind of maybe move things around. So for instance, today I plan to do a writing session right now, but instead I'm podcasting or recording a podcast because I came to my computer and I was looking at all my stuff and I realized somehow I left my scene notes in a different room of the house. And I had just been listening to another podcast and I thought, I really feel like podcasting. And I thought, okay, I can spend some time doing this and then go grab my scene notes and then do my writing. So again, sometimes, I just make a momentary decision to go with something different. But I know I'm going to take time to write later because I have a block of time I have carved out in my day to do both podcasting and writing. I knew I was going to do them both today. I have, again, swapped what order I'm doing them in, but I'm still going to do both. So that's kind of, again, I make some split decisions. I go with my gut. But as long as I have time carved out to be creative. So I have to have creative blocks that I carve out. And again, sometimes I wake up in the morning and I've got a massive headache or my ears ringing or there's something going on that makes it really hard to create. And so then I look at my schedule and think, okay, am I going to do more tomorrow? Am I going to drink lots of water and do all the health things I think I can do to manage the symptom I'm having and hope that I can carve out time to write later? Sometimes I have to make that kind of decision. And that's just how it works. I can't always know that I'm going to have mental energy first thing in the morning or right after lunch or late at night. It's going to vary for me. But hopefully, hopefully you're not like me and your health is more even keeled, your days are more even keeled, and you can pick a time where you have the most energy that's pretty steady most days and fits in your schedule well. But it really is about picking your time and making it happen, whether it's 15 minutes or 2 hours or 4 hours. You need to have time to create, and you have to be the one that chooses it. It's like how when you write a poem, and there are different types of poetry. You can write very free form poetry that's kind of anything goes type poetry. You can also write poetry that has very specific rules to it and specific rhyme schemes and syllable lengths for each line. But sometimes there's an interesting freedom within the form. And it's interesting kind of how that works. So I feel like creating a schedule for writing is kind of like that. You create a form for yourself, and then you find creativity within it. And to me, that allows for more freedom. Knowing that I have a block of time to be creative allows me to have more freedom. So again, today I knew I was going to spend 4 hours being creative. And I was going to split that time between podcasting and writing. And yes, I chose to podcast first. I hope I don't regret that decision. I don't think I will. And then I'm going to write after I record this podcast. And tomorrow I'll edit the podcast and schedule it and put it out. But I know that to me it's interesting, but even the editing of a podcast is not creative in the same way that creating a podcast is. And I've learned that if I try to push through a podcast session where I create and edit and schedule and do all these things all at once, it really bothers me. So I have what I call my creative blocks. And I've discovered that that's a form that I've made that works for me. Where I think, okay, this is 4 hours of creative time. I'm going to use it for, and then I usually come up with 2 or 3 ways I'm going to use the creative time. And then I go for it. And I find, again, a lot of freedom in that. So that's why for a lot of people, there's power in what's called time blocking. And time blocking is just literally saying, I'm going to make this block of time be about this particular type of work. And there are writers who do this, and I think it's the guy who wrote The Power of Habit. The book is here somewhere on one of my shelves, but he talks about the time blocking method and how he really does deep work. Actually, it might be the Deep Work book and not The Power of Habit. There's a book about deep work that I read last year. So anyway, I will try to find that quote and add it to the show notes. But if you take 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours and say, this is a block of time that I'm going to use for this deep work, for creativity, or for social media and marketing, and you dedicate it to that and you're consistent about it, your mind kind of gets in this habit and it gets used to it. And it's kind of like it creates a little bit of its own momentum and kind of a little bit of a dopamine rush. Like you're like, oh, it's time to write now because I set this aside of time and I wrote this time last week or this time yesterday. And so now it's time to do this and I'm excited and I'm ready for it. And it's like the more you use that time block for that particular area, the more that habit sort of starts to take shape and builds momentum. So that's kind of the purpose in creating those time blocks. Also, sometimes some people really like small blocks of time. Some people like really what they call deep work sessions. I think both are useful. And the reason I say that, and excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of tea because I'm getting a little dry while I'm speaking here. So the reason I say that is because, again, like I said earlier, some people don't have time for big, long, deep work sessions. Sometimes life is so busy or so hard that 15 minutes is all we've got. And then the thing is, I think you can do fairly deep work in small blocks of time, like 15 minutes or the Pomodoro method, the 25-minute method. I think you can get a lot done in a short session, especially if you take that time beforehand to prepare for it. Like I mentioned earlier, spending some time, maybe you're doing a chore, maybe you're folding laundry, you're doing the dishes, or you're cooking and you're thinking to yourself about the story you're writing and you kind of plan out how you want that writing session to look. And maybe you write a little reminder for yourself on your phone or somewhere else. And then when you sit down to do that writing session, you glance at your notes, you remember what you thought about, and you write. Like just blast it out. And again, I think you can get into a really deep work zone in just 15 minutes and get a lot done. And then take a little note about what you did and step away from it until you could do that work again. I think that could be really useful. But oftentimes what people mean by deep work and big time blocks is they're talking about anywhere between an hour and 4 hours of deep work time in a singular area. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have your hands on your keyboard typing away for that whole time block. If you're calling that your creative or your writing time block, maybe that's not how you're spending that entire 4 hours. I'm using the biggest example, or at least I think of the biggest example, like a 4 hour time block or a 2 hour time block. You're not necessarily writing madly that entire time if that's your writing time block. Maybe you're taking some time to scribble out some ideas on a piece of paper or on your phone. Maybe you're doing talk to text. Maybe you're typing part of that time. Maybe you write for a little bit and then you stand up and you pace around your room and then you write again. Maybe even take a short walk within that. Like, so that deep work time is more like the entire time you're going to think about your project creatively for that amount of time. So one of the things I read about in that book about deep work, the author was talking about his 2 hours of deep work time. During his 2 hours of deep work time, he might be scribbling notes on a whiteboard. He might be typing something. He might be handwriting something. He might be doing talk to text. He might be doing research, or he might be taking a walk and thinking about all the things that he was working on and then coming back to write again. But that was all within a 2 hour time block he'd carved out for himself to think about that project every day. And so that's kind of a way you can see that time block. It doesn't have to be all one type of work within the time block. It can be just something you're saying, this is the time I'm setting aside to do deep thinking about this project and to do deep work on that project that encompasses all parts of that project. So that's one way to use a time block, and that's one way that people do use time blocks. And I like to do that more than I thought I would. I know that I need to move as a writer who has health issues with inflammation and chronic pain. If I don't move every 25 to 30 minutes, 45 minutes max, I end up hurting pretty badly. So I have to take breaks and move around. And it can't just be like this wild hand motion I'm doing in the video that I'm recording. I actually need to get up and stand up and stuff. So if you think about your deep work time blocks as just time that you're spending really mentally thinking about that project that you're working on, it allows for some space for movement in there, whether you're taking 5 minutes to do some yoga or some exercise, or you're going for a 10-minute walk or a 20-minute walk and coming back to the table or wherever you're working and really getting back into the physical process, the typing or the writing or the talk to text of your work. So again, time blocking doesn't necessarily have to just mean all one activity during that time. And again, like I said before, I think you could do deep work in a much shorter session without it being 2 hours or 4 hours. I have found that I basically like to do short sessions within a big time block. So again, like I said today, I gave myself a 4 hour time block to be creative. Now, that includes this podcast. It includes some writing that I'm doing. I'm not going to do it all at home. I'm going to mix in a few little walks in there. And so, I have this plan set up for 4 hours, but it's not 4 hours of all the same stuff. And I'm thankful that I have that 4 hours to do that. Tomorrow, I won't have a 4 hour time block. Wednesday, I won't have a 4 hour time block. Thursday, I won't have a 4 hour time block. I'll have like smaller chunks of time that I'll work throughout the day. So I vary it up from day to day. It's not always going to look the same. And I recommend that you give yourself both a schedule of time that you can do and enough variability that you can live life, right? Because we need to live life. We need to enjoy our lives. We need to care for the people in our lives. And we need to take care of ourselves too. So I think that having a time block to create is important. I think it's important for us to have boundaries around the time that we create. And we need to say, yes, I need this time to create. But at the same time, it's good to be able to look at our whole life and our weekly schedule and say, okay, so Monday, that's for me today, I'm recording on a Monday, I can have 4 hours of time to create. And on Tuesday, I'm going to have like a couple hour time block and a half hour time block. And on Wednesday, I'm going to have a half hour here and a half hour there and a couple hours this other spot, you know, and being able to think through where it all fits. I'm still going to take that time. I'm still going to protect that time, but it's not always going to be the same every day. And it's not going to be the same for me every week after week after week. I'm going to have variations within that. So I think sometimes people hear time blocks and they hear, you know, protecting their time, and it can be stressful because you start thinking it has to look like a 9 to 5 work schedule where it's the same every day. But I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's actually realistic for how variable our lives are and how many things happen in our lives. We need to be able to have variation, and I think that being able to work anywhere between that 15-minute little window or a 10-minute window for creativity and a 4 hour creative window for an opportunity, it's good to be able to have that type of difference in how we work. And I know there are times in my life there was no way I would have had 4 hours for a creative block. It would have been, you know, an hour max or an hour and a half. And unless, like, I know there were times when my husband took care of my kids for a whole day, so I got to have the whole day to write. And then I didn't know what to do with myself because I'd been working in much shorter time blocks, and the 8 hours was like, I don't know what to do with that. Like, so, but it is nice when we have family members who are willing to gift us with that type of time. And I'm really thankful for all the ways that my husband has really been my biggest supporter by offering me time blocks in which I can create. And so I'm very thankful for him, and thankful to my daughters for understanding, when they were very young, that I needed time to write. And maybe not when they were like tiny, tiny, but when they were in upper elementary school, I would say I needed time to write, and they were okay. Like, they were fine. They had things to do, and they were okay. So I encourage you, if you're a mom or a dad and you're doing childcare or you're doing elder care, that you can find times to write. And if you're busy with work, you can. I know it's tough. I used to write on lunch breaks, and it wasn't easy. But I recommend trying to find at least 15 minutes every day that you can create. And maybe not every day, maybe it's 15 minutes 4 days a week or 3 days a week. But I recommend looking for those windows, those moments. And if you can carve out a really long session every once in a while, I think it's totally worthwhile. And I think consistency really matters. So I think 3 days a week is like a good baseline, but I have had years where it was just 2 days a week where I was creating, and that's all I could do. So you know where your strengths are, you know where your schedule is. I recommend, again, sitting down every week on a Sunday night, looking at your week schedule and saying, okay, where are the realistic spaces where I can add in a little creative time block for myself, for my writing, for my career. Because doing that, even just taking that time weekly to look for those times that you could create, and then maybe every morning taking just a couple of minutes to look at your schedule and go, okay, oh, that's right, that 15-minute window, that's where I'm going to create. You know you're going to go do it, and it really helps, I think, to have that just mapped out in your mental landscape for the day. It really does. So uh, please consider checking out um, my blog this week. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about carving out blocks of time on there, And I'll be also adding something to my Patreon page, which at this point has been very minimalistic, but I would love to have your support on my Patreon page. So I'm going to be adding in a link for that and adding in more about taking time for your creativity this week on my blog and my Patreon page. So please check that out and consider checking out some of my books. They're definitely available online, and check out that book funnel. So thank you for joining me. I'm Tyreen Martinson, and this is my little truth about storytelling.